Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 13. So now we have a new turn of events happening with the king Saul in what's going on. So he's the king. They've defeated the Ammonites. He's been anointed king. He's rallied Israel together in the last chapters. So now we're going to see this new change as Saul has become the king. He's taking this role upon himself. So Saul offers a burnt offering. The Lord rejects him, chooses another captain over his people. So Saul's not around anymore. Basically, this is going to be an interesting change. Now, verse 1, Saul reigned 1 year. When he had reigned 2 years, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. And the rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. So this is saying in the second year, basically, of Saul being the king, of Israel, he chose 3,000 men. Remember the prophecy that Samuel gave that he's going to take your sons and he's going to make them horsemen. He's going to make them foot soldiers. He's going to build an army. What did Saul do by the second year? He built an army of 3,000 men. He has 2,000 with him, and he has another 1,000 back in Gibeah. That's Saul's hometown. With his commander Jonathan. Now verse 3, and Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard say that Saul had smitten a garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel also was had in abomination with the Philistines. And the people were called together after Saul to Gilgal. So Jonathan went and took out a garrison of the Philistines, smote their army, took a whole bunch of guys out, probably pushed them back to abandon that land so that Jonathan and his team could take it. And at this time, too, remember, Philistines were in the area, kind of taking over. They had oppressed Israel, and so now they're pushing against the Philistines and rebelling against them, basically, and fighting to get them out. Verse 5, and the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash, eastward from Bethaven. So here's the thing that's interesting. 3,000 Israelite troops against 36,000 people. So 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, let alone the foot soldier army that was innumerable. Basically, the Philistines weren't messing around. They're basically taking it right to Israel in this. And so this is a big deal. Now, there is a note that comes up commonly with verse 5 when they talk about these chariots. That's a lot of chariots. 30,000 chariots, that's an insane amount. So here's something that is an important thing to look at in Hastings' Dictionary of the Bible. He makes this comment. He says, apart from any question as to the accuracy of the original figures, the transmission of the text by repeated copying for hundreds and thousands of years introduces a large element of uncertainty. If we assume that numbers were denoted by figures in early times, figures are far more easily altered, omitted, or added than words. But as we have seen, we have at present no strong ground for such an assumption. But even when words are used, the words denoting numbers in Hebrew are easily confused with each other, as in English. Just as 8 and 80 differ only by a single letter, so in Hebrew, especially in the older style of writing, the addition of a single letter would make 3 into 30. And again, in copying numerals, the scribe is not kept right by the context as he is with other words. It was quite possible, too, for a scribe to have views of his own as to what was probable in the way of numbers and to correct what he considered erroneous. So this is something we have to look at, is sometimes these numbers might seem huge, and then maybe they're not really that big. Maybe they were misinterpreted in the translations over and over and over again. They were copied and copied and copied and copied and copied for thousands of years. Or maybe they were trying to bolster it. Maybe they want this story to sound even better, that Israel wins, kind of a thing, So we're gonna, the big fish story. Every time you tell it, the fish gets bigger. So we just have to keep that in mind, because just like with words, you can understand the context by all the other words around them. You can get the context of the meaning of what that word is. Numbers don't always fit that rule. They're kind of different in their category. And so it's easy to confuse and cause problems with numbers. If you ever taken algebra, you understand what I'm talking about. It's easy sometimes to confuse numbers. Algebra is always a crazy subject for most people. So probably not 30,000, maybe 3,000 chariots is probably a little bit more likely. Verse 6, when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, basically they're hosed, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves and in thickets and in rocks and in high places and in pits. Now, I want to understand something here. This is really fascinating. When Israel gets scared, they run to the mountains and they hide. Okay? There are lots and lots and lots and lots of caves and cave networks all over Judea. Okay, you can go there today and see them. There's tons of caves. In fact, there's caves that people have carved in deeper and made deeper, and they've built like shelves into the walls of the caves. They've drawn on the sides of the caves. They've marked things in them. They've done things over the years. So this is important because in the Book of Mormon, we hear when Nephi and his brothers are kicked out of Jerusalem. Remember when they're trying to get the brass plates from Laban, and Laban sends his guards to kill him. Where do they go? They run outside the city and they go hide in the caves. Very important point, okay? That's not some weird made up thing that Joseph Smith did. This is legit. It's real that they would do that. And there's tons of evidence of that out there around Israel right now. Very important. In fact, down in the place of Lehi, if you go, or Lehi, the place of the jawbone, if you go back into Judges, when we learned about Samson, they have excavated an area down there that actually has a cave network built into the mountain, where there's people have dug caves, probably to hide, to escape other marauders or other groups and things. And they're still excavating some of that today, and still finding new cave networks and tunnels that were carved inside the mountain. Basically, it's pretty fascinating. So just understand that that's not an uncommon thing. Okay. So verse 7, some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. So even some fled to the other side of Jordan. Others went to find Saul in Gilgal and stay with him. Verse 8, and he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. Remember, Samuel told him, you go do these things, this is going to happen, and then you come down here, and we're going to stay in this area for 7 days to do the anointings and the sacrifices and things. So he was supposed to meet Samuel down there to do the sacrifices. If you remember that from, I believe that was chapter 11, that Samuel told Saul after he anointed him and prophesied of what all that stuff was going to happen, that he needed to meet Samuel down there at Gilgal to do these sacrifices. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So here's the problem. Saul's going, okay, we need to do these sacrifices. This is an important thing to do to finish, my coronation, to honor God, to put all this together. We've got to get this done. But the Philistines are attacking us. So I've got pressure on me as the leader to do something, to make a move, to make a decision on this. So he decides, I'm the king, I'm anointed of God, I'm going to do it. Verse 9. And Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. So Saul did what the priests are supposed to do. Only the priests. There has never been a time in all of Israel where it has not been the priests that are supposed to administer the sacrifices, basically. So this is important. Verse 10, and it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. So if he waited one more day, it would have worked out. And Saul went out to meet him that he might salute him. So Saul's like, yay, you're here. Thank you very much. You can take over. I'm glad that you're here for this. And Samuel's like, what hast thou done? Samuel's like, what's going on here? What are you doing? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself therefore and offered a burnt offering. So he just said, look, I'm the king. I just did it so that we can get it done because it's crunch time. I've got to do something against the Philistines. I'm more afraid of the Philistines than I am of God, is basically the hidden message in Saul's words there. Verse 13, and Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Okay, remember, priorities. This is pointing priorities out. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. So Saul's kingdom is done. Basically, God's going to give it to somebody else. So here's a fascinating thing too. God's been preparing somebody else. Again, like what Joseph Smith found out, he himself is not the main cog in the wheel of God's works. God controls the cogs. He appoints people as they're willing to be righteous and follow him to help with his commandments and help with his work. But we are not the main cog of it. We're just a person to help. Okay, there is no leader in the church that is not replaceable. And this is why we have succession of prophets. This is why things are set up the way they are, why callings have limits on times, because it's not about the person, it's about the getting God's work done. Basically, we're just there to help, but we're not the cog. We're helping the cog, but we're not the cog. So here's something that's interesting out of James E. Talmage's Article of Faith book. He says, think also of Saul, who had been called from the field to be made king of the nation. When the Philistines were marshaled against Israel in Michmash, Saul waited for Samuel, under whose hand he had received his kingly anointing, and to whom he had looked in the days of his humility for guidance. He asked that the prophet come and offer sacrifices to the Lord on behalf of the people. But growing impatient at Samuel's delay, Saul prepared the burnt offering himself, forgetting that though he occupied the throne, wore the crown, and bore the scepter, these insignia of kingly power gave him no right to officiate even as a deacon in the priesthood of God. And for this and other instances of his unrighteous presumption, he was rejected of God, and another was made king in his place. Remember that in the Doctrine and Covenants, we learn if somebody exercises their priesthood in an unrighteous way, amen to the priesthood, it's null and void. While Saul didn't necessarily have priesthood, technically, he acted in the priesthood office, and so he's being rejected. He wasn't following the commandments. He was trying to use a loophole in the commandments to get done what he thought was important, not what God thought was important. How many times does that come up in our life? When you think, oh, I really want to do this, but that's not right. I need to go this way. And we look for a loophole to get around God's laws. There's a story of this happening with a bunch of BYU students. I don't know if this story is true. If you know this story is true, put it in the comments. I'd love to get more feedback on this or try to learn more about this story. There's a story of a bunch of BYU students, men and women, who decided that, you know what? The church accepts civil marriage. Okay, the law of chastity says you cannot have sex unless you are legally and lawfully married, basically. The church accepts legal marriage. So why don't we go down to Vegas? We'll get married. We'll have a wild weekend together, and then we'll get divorced and come back and go back to school on Monday. And technically, it's okay as far as the commandments go. We don't technically violate a commandment. Well, they did it, and from what I understand, they were all excommunicated because of it. Because again, they thought they found a loophole in God's commandments, and it wasn't a loophole. Yes, the church does accept civil marriage as a marriage, which means it's not against the law of chastity to have sex with your husband or wife, basically who you're married to. But the point, the spirit of the law is about morality and decency, not how can we find a way to fulfill the lusts of the flesh. So that's the problem, is they violated the spirit of the law by trying to look for loopholes. So this is kind of what Saul's doing here, is he's trying to justify a loophole to justify what he's doing. It's not really that bad, but it's important to get done because he thinks it's important to get done based on his worldly priorities. So that's the problem that he's had here. Verse 15, and Samuel arose and gat him up from Gilgal unto Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people that were present with him about 600 men. Remember, they're still having to deal with, he's got 600 men. He had 2,000, and he's only got 600 with him now. So he's got these other garrisons out there. And Saul, verse 16, and Saul and Jonathan, his son, now we learn, Jonathan, who's a commander of 1,000 men, is Saul's son. And the people that were present with him abode in Gibeah of Benjamin, but the Philistines encamped in Michmash. Verse 17, and the spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. 1 company turned unto the way that leadeth to Ophrah, and unto the land of Shual. And so the spoilers, these are probably, my assumption on this one would be that these are the people that are, they're called the spoilers. These are the ones that are like the special forces guys. They're going out to just make a mess. They're going to make life miserable for the enemy, basically. Destroying buildings, blowing stuff up, burning bridges, making roads a mess, basically just ruining things for the other enemy, making it hard for them to fight. Let's see, verse 18, and another company turned the way to Beth Horon, and another company turned to the way of the border that looketh to the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. Verse 19, now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. So this is an important point, okay? A smith is a blacksmith, somebody who deals with metal. Okay, verse 20, but all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his share, his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulters, and for the forks and asses, and to sharpen the goads. So here's the problem that Israel has, okay? In this time frame, okay, Israel has grown up as this nation during what's known as the Bronze Age. Okay, if you look at ancient history, there's a time of history called the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is a time when they used bronze. It's like they just suddenly the idea of using bronze and brass got adopted and it took off. Okay, bronze is not a natural metal. It's usually a combination of, if I remember right, it is copper and tin that were combined together basically to make brass or bronze. They use this for making their weapons, for making their garden tools, those kinds of things. So about this time, though, in Samuel, towards the end of Judges, getting into Samuel, iron is starting to be used more. They're smelting iron. Iron is more natural. It's a heavier metal. If you ever had like a cast iron stove or a cast iron, pot or things like that, crock pots, cast iron, other things like that, they're heavy. So iron is a thicker, heavier metal, and it holds a blade better, if I remember right, from bronze. So iron is a more pure metal. Bronze is a mixed metal. It flakes easy. It breaks easier. It's not as strong. The tensile strength isn't quite as there as iron. So now they figured out iron, how to mine iron, how to smelt it down and do it. So Philistines have capitalized on the iron trade. And they have put themselves in a position where Israel is reliant upon the Philistines for this trade. So they're always going to the Philistines going, we don't know how to do this, but can you sharpen our axes and our saws, and can you help us make these things and do stuff? So Israel hasn't learned how to deal with iron. The Philistines figured it out and have capitalized on that. So now Israel and the Philistines are at war with each other. They're fighting, and here's the problem, is in order for the Philistines are going to use this as an advantage, leverage this in the war to say they can't have strong weapons because we control that part of the economy. We control all that. So this is what's the situation that's coming together here, basically. Now, if we look at this is from the Old Testament Study Guide. Scholars believe that at this time the Israelites did not know how to work with iron. The Philistines guarded the secret carefully to maintain superiority in weapons over the softer brass weapons of the Israelites. As a result, the Israelites did not have the superior chariots of iron, nor could they manufacture swords and spears of iron. The other instruments mentioned, share, a coulter, axe, mattock, and gold, had to be taken to the Philistines for sharpening. A share was a metal instrument used to plow the ground. A coulter was a small garden hoe used to loosen the earth and weed the soil. A mattock was an Egyptian hoe or grubbing axe, and a goad was a sharp rod about 8 feet long used to prod stubborn animals. Kind of goad people along. That's where that came from, basically. So they had to go, the Israelites had to go to the Philistines to sharpen all these things. So now the Israelites are going, well, we're at war with them. This isn't going to work out. And the Philistines are like, yes, we have this advantage, basically, because we make all your weapons and we help you have your weapons. And so we control the technology. We have an advantage. So verse 22, so it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan. But with Saul and with Jonathan, his son, was there found. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the passage of Michmash. So here's the problem is basically they're going, okay, we need to fight these people off. We don't have weapons. Where do we, well, the Philippines are our manufacturers of weapons. What do we do? This isn't a good situation to be in. The Philistines know this. They know that they have this economic advantage that they're going to turn into a military advantage against Israel. So let's jump to the next chapter, chapter 14, to learn how does this turn out. We'll see you then.